The meeting of the Committee on Strategic Planning and Budget of the Board of School Directors will please come to order. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Director Ferguson.
Present.
Director Garcia.
Present.
Director Herndon.
Present.
Director Jackson.
Present.
Director Leonard.
Present.
Director Halloran has asked to be excused this evening. Director Seamson.
Present.
Director Zomber.
Present.
Chair Gokul Gandhi.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Great. The Chair will now ask the Secretary to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. The Chair invites any members of the audience who wish to participate to do so and asks that those who do not wish to participate please remain silent during the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This meeting is being conducted in person from the Central Services Building. In order to allow for as much public access and participation as possible, this meeting is also being broadcast via live stream on the MPS website and on the MPS YouTube stream, the links to which may be found on the MPS website on the broadcast page. Before we begin tonight's meeting, we have a short announcement regarding interpretation services for the Spanish-speaking members of our audience.
Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a la Junta de la Mesa Directiva de las Escuelas Públicas de Milwaukee. Si desea escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor llame al 312-626-6799 e introduzca el número de reunión 832-0725-4267 seguido por el símbolo de número. Luego, introduzca el código 883149, seguido por el símbolo de número. Nuevamente, para escuchar esta reunión en español, llame al 312-626-6799 e introduzca el número de reunión 832-0725 4267, seguido por el símbolo de número. Luego, introduzca el código 883149, seguido por el símbolo de número.
For each of our items of business, we will hold a discussion and public hearing. If you wish to speak, please fill out a speaker slip and bring it to our Secretary, Dr. Owen Moore. We have no virtual speakers registered. Do we have any in-person speakers registered?
Not for this meeting yet.
Okay, great. Written testimony will be accepted for transmittal to the board. Send this testimony to the Office of Board Governance, P.O. Box 2181, Milwaukee, Wisconsin 53201, or fax to 414-475-8071, or email it to governance@milwaukee.k12.wi.us. As a reminder, Robert's Rule of Order dictates that all comments should be directed to the chair of the committee. Any questions or requests, including those from the public, committee members, or administration, are to be directed toward the chair, who will determine the most efficient way to address them. For the safety of all and to ensure the good order of the meeting, harassment or intimidation tactics of any kind will not be tolerated. Anyone who engages in such harassing or intimidating words or actions will immediately be asked to cease. If such behavior continues, a recess will be called and the offending parties will be removed from the meeting. Anyone ejected from the meeting may continue to listen to the meeting or access the agenda items online. However, the individual will not be allowed to rejoin the meeting. No one other than members of the board, designated staff, and those who have been invited to present or participate in items of business will be allowed on stage before, during, or after meetings of the board and its committees. Finally, for our listening audience, if you wish to access this evening's agenda items and attachments online, you may do so by visiting the meeting's agendas and minutes page of the MPAS website. Now let's begin. Madam Secretary, item 1.
Item 1 is action on a request to approve the proposed timetable for the fiscal year 2025-2026 budget development and approval process. The recommendation is that the board adopt the fiscal year 2025-2026 proposed budget timetable as set forth in the attachment to this item.
Will the administration please present the item?
Chair Gokul Gandhi and members of the committee, Eduardo Galvan, Interim Superintendent. This evening, we are sharing with you an outline of the proposed budget timetable for 2025-2026 school year. To summarize this outline, I have with me from the Department of Finance and Budget, Nick Sinram, supported by Aita Sala. Following the summary, we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you. Mr. Sinram?
Thank you, Superintendent Galvan. Nick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. The item that you see before you summarizes the board's consideration of the FY '26 budget. That's for the 25-26 school year. The item summarizes the timetable for your consideration of the budget throughout May and adoption, followed by the adjustment in fall after the third Friday count. In general, the document lays out the beginning of May, the administration will release the budget. It'll be considered first was a presentation to the public, followed by a statutorily required listening session, two meetings for board member consideration and amendment, and then a final approval. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Do committee members wish to make comments or ask questions? Director Ferguson? Oh,
Go ahead. Okay, thank you, Chair. In light of us having a new superintendent now, is she going to be involved in your budget proposal at all?
administration.
Chair Gokul Gandhi, Director Ferguson, members of the board or committee, excuse me. We obviously plan to involve the new superintendent as much as possible, depending upon completion of all contractual obligations and everything, and when she's on board, absolutely.
Any follow-up, Director Ferguson?
Nope, thank you.
Other committee members? President Herndon?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mine is not a question, but an observation, which is between the first pass of the budget versus the second pass, which occurs in October for submission to the city and finalization. Would you explain for our listening audience what's the difference between the two, why we do that second pass? I think that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Administration?
Dick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. Absolutely, that's a great question. So in the state of Wisconsin, school districts prepare their budget based off of projected revenues and projected expenditures. That is necessary to prepare that throughout the spring so that schools can, review their budgets with their school communities and plan ahead. And then in the state of Wisconsin, like in most states, the actual revenue allocated by the state follows the student. And so we don't know our actual allocation until about October 15th or 16th. And that's based primarily off of enrollment as of the third Friday of school. So then it's necessary for our school communities to adjust their budgets given the realities in their classrooms and the actual funds that they're allocated by the Department of Public Instruction in October.
Any follow-up?
No, thank you very much.
Other questions? Director Jackson?
Just to emphasize that this budget right here does not authorize any spending, just strictly proposing the timetable set, and that's it.
Nick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. That is absolutely correct. This is a timetable for your tentative approval, understanding that the board always has the discretion to adjust their meetings. And then there is no fiscal impact of this item. It is approving the administration to continue the budget process along this time frame.
Any follow-up?
No.
Any other questions or comments?
Just that, I'm sorry.
Yes,
just a
administration.
Point of clarification, just Director Jackson, members of the Chair Gokul Gandhi. So in reference to when this budget is approved, we do spend that money up until October, whenever that adjustment is made. I just wanted to clarify because, again, the board will approve a budget, understanding that it will be adjusted based upon that. I just wanted to clarify for the public. Thank you very much.
Any follow-up? Any questions? Director Garcia?
This is more of a comment. So I know that the finance department has been doing a great job at better visualizing all things that have to do with pathway, that money coming in, coming out. So I just want to, I guess, ask the question, like, are the plans as we're making these public-facing presentations to ensure some of that more, I don't know, closeness to a budget? Because I feel that many times it's very intimidating for folks to even understand what they're looking at. So maybe, you know, as the time, not only looking at the timetable, but really the plan to better present the information to not only the board, but to the public.
Oh, Director Garcia, do you mean perhaps a data visualization tool that members of our public could use to build their own MPS budget administration? I've been asking for 4 years, so, you know, just had to plug that in there.
Thank you.
Chair Gokul Gandhi, Director Garcia, members of the committee, that is our plan. Obviously, you know, one of the things that we've been discussing is, you know, in dealing with this issue of transparency, to make sure that, because I will say this, it's never been a matter of us not providing the information, it's providing it in a way that's understandable, and that people can at least reasonably know what to ask, right? Because I think that's the clarity, because it's not that we were trying to not, I think maybe we shared too much and shared information that, you know, not to, even as someone who doesn't work in finance, or if you don't look at these things every day, you might not know. It's all there, but you might not understand it. So we definitely are making plans to do that, and hopefully they are, you know, small steps in the right direction.
Any follow-up, Director Garcia?
No, thank you. Looking forward to that.
Director Zomber?
Thank you, Chair Gokul Gandhi. I have a question about budget amendments, and well, maybe it's more of just a request. So I know we'll be getting, there'll be 3 new board members right around the time that budget amendments will be due. And I'm just wondering if administration or finance can work with those new board members to give them education around how they would submit an amendment, kind of what that process would be like. I know when I first got on the board, it came really quick, and then it was gone, and I didn't know what to do. So just wanted to share that experience so that we can support our new board members through that process.
Administration?
Chair Gokul Gandhi, Director Zambor, members of the committee, Eduardo Galvan, Interim Superintendent. We would be happy to provide training, information to any board member, whether they're going to be new to the board or just want a refresher, you know, to make sure that that process is understood. Yes.
Any follow-up? Director Simpson?
I'm also going to just assume on that note that our Office of Board Governance will be there for us, as well as the Office of Accountability and Efficiency, just because I know even after being on the board for a number of years, it is still a mystery to me. So it is nice to know that you will be here, and I think, right, especially for our new board members, but for all of us. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. What is the pleasure of the committee with respect to this item? Director Jackson.
I move that we accept the proposed timeline for the fiscal year of 2025 and 26 for the budget development and approval process.
Is there any further discussion? Okay. Can I get a second? Director Ferguson? Okay. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
On Director Jackson's motion to approve the proposed timetable for the fiscal year 2025-26 budget development and approval process, Director Ferguson?
Aye.
Director Garcia?
Aye.
Director Herndon?
Aye.
Director Jackson?
Aye.
Director Leonard?
Aye.
Director Simpson?
Aye.
Director Zomber?
Aye.
Chair Gokul Gandhi?
Aye.
That's 8 ayes. The motion passes.
Madam Secretary, next item, please.
Item 2 is action on a request to approve the proposed fiscal year 2025-26 budget priorities. The recommendation is that the board approve the proposed fiscal year 2025-2026 budget priorities as listed in the item.
Would the administration please present the item?
Chair Gokul Gandhi, members of the committee, Eduardo Galvan, interim superintendent. Tonight I have with me Nick Sinram, supported by Aicha Sava, to walk us through the 2025-2026 budget priorities. As always, we'll be happy to entertain any questions you may have following the sharing of this information. Thank you. Mr. Sinram.
Nick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. The item in front of you outlines the guidelines or priorities that the administration will consider throughout the budget process when determining how to allocate our limited funds. To summarize, we of course prioritize direct in the classroom support for our schools, and then moving down the list of priorities, choose to support those direct educators with centrally funded supports, including maintaining, whenever possible, the educational services allowed by the referendum, including art, music, and physical education. We also have some facilities and security improvements that are necessary to phase in, as well as the goal of increasing or maintaining staff salaries within pace with inflation in order to attract and retain teachers to actually fill our classroom positions. And that summarizes our priorities. We would be happy to take any questions, feedback, comment.
I'm going to ask first if we have any members of the public who wish to comment on this item.
Do not.
Okay. Director Simpson.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about number 5. I'm assuming that this is, I won't assume, I'm just going to let you explain a little bit more about number 5.
Administration.
Chair Gokul Gandhi, Director Simpson, members of the committee. Again, as we are moving forward, unfortunately, we live in a world where increased safety and security measures are something that we need to do. So this refers to certain things with either cameras, secure doors, things of that nature, and then eventually create kind of a more centralized command center so that we're able to respond more quickly. Earlier or prior to my sitting in this position, there was some trips taken to examine, different school districts and how they're doing. Currently, we also contract out some of our work regarding safety in terms of when people may try to access our buildings illegally. There's a company that's called, and then another company that related to that reports, and if there's a way that we could maybe make that more efficient and a quicker response. Those are the things, and this is kind of not something that's going to happen overnight, but this is some steps to move towards that. Some of the things that we had also prioritized were, for example, making sure that when people come to our front doors, currently we have some systems, but there's a better way of doing that, when you ring the doorbell, it goes to a more live camera. If somebody, again, tries to access our building in off hours or during the summer even, and we could direct them at a central location. Sir, ma'am, if you're looking to enroll your child, please come to 5225 West Valete Street, something to that effect. So that's what that represents.
Any follow-up?
No, thank you for that explanation.
Director Zomberg.
Thank you, Chair Gokul Gandhi. I just want to, thank administration for adding and prioritizing the centralized security command center. I think that's a really smart priority to put in the budget. So thank you for including that. One question I have around the salary schedules, or maybe just a comment to make sure when we're looking at that to also look at athletic staff salaries and salary schedules. I think that's something that gets forgotten in the budgeting process. So just wanted to flag that.
Any follow-up, administration? Or is it just a note? You're good? Got it? Okay. Director Garcia?
Yes, my question has to do with our number one priority in regards to the school budgets. I know that a lot of time, and there's like a long process for working with, school leaders to really get school budgets ideally to where they want to support the type of programs and, really adequately well-resourced, the programs that they have in those buildings. My question is more like, as all of this was being put together for this process, like, were there any patterns in regards to successes that we're seeing at the school level, or more specifically challenges as related to like budgeting pieces?
Administration.
Chair Gokul Gandhi, Director Garcia, members of the committee, there's always challenges in the fiscal environment that we are currently in when we prepare budgets, right? I mean, that has unfortunately been, even when I was at the school level and in the 20-plus years that I've been doing school-based budgeting, there have been very, very, very few times that I can remember where I, as a district and specifically as a school leader, that I had the ability to add into the budget outside of just enrollment changes. That's a real challenge that still exists, right? Oftentimes we have heard Chris Thiel and others talk about special education funding or lack thereof, English language learner funding, lack thereof, and how that impacts the district in a negative manner. So as Mr. Sinbrand alluded to earlier, the referendum has been a savior in terms of being able to maintain some of the things that we added in the first referendum in terms of art, music, and physical education. Again, to be more direct to your question, there are challenges. Every year in every building, there are challenges, and until some of those funding changes occur, we're going to continue to have challenges, and looking forward, even greater challenges. We're doing our best to make sure that every school can maintain what they have, and as a district that we are doing our best to be as equitable as we can when we support school buildings so that all our students have at least access to the programs that every student should have.
Any follow-up, Director Garcia?
No, thank you for that. I think it's just important that, just to reiterate to the public that that continues to be our number one priority, that there's obviously challenges that have historically been there in this funding landscape that we have with the chaos that's ensured, out there. We're doing our best to try to, support and keep the calm and kind of keep a steady hand in regards to that. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and, just hoping that we can get ahead of a lot of those challenges as best as we can as we improve, the processes that, just adequately distribute the resources that we have. Thank you.
I think I saw Director Leonard, and then I'll go to Director Jackson.
So just a comment and then a question. First of all, I had the opportunity to see a couple of those centralized control centers. Definitely increased the speed and efficiency when they had to go and actually call in support services, be it for both medical or safety reasons. So it was something that was that would be great to have here as well. The question I have, and at the time I was under the understanding that we already had a lot of the possible equipment and possible infrastructure available to us with regards to that centralized system. I'm not sure if I understood that correctly, but I'm just sort of asking.
Administration.
Chair Gokul Gandhi, Director Leonard, members of the committee. Specifically, Director Leonard, yes, we have a lot of equipment in terms of cameras and things, but when we talk about increasing the capacity of those cameras or switching how they are being used, and without wanting to get into too much detail, when I mentioned, for example, we have to make sure that our panels, and excuse me if I don't say this exactly correct, we have members of our technology department who are probably saying, oh my gosh, what is he saying? But so we have to update some panels. We have to do some things that would enable us to use those cameras and centralize them, access those cameras from all of our sites to a central location which we can do now, but not at the level that we would need to do that. And so those are things that need to be updated.
Thank you.
Director Jackson.
Yeah, if you can explain the purpose of the fund balance and what exactly it is, just so the public can get a better understanding.
Absolutely. Nick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. So each of our revenues and expenditures are tracked and reported through various funds. And these funds tie to statutory requirements set up by the state. And it's how we track, monitor, and report to the public and to the state our spending. Each fund tracks their revenue and then balances that with expenditures. And typically, the goal for us and for most organizations is to present a balanced budget where the revenues that were meant for this year's students are providing services this year to those students. However, there are reasons where you may underspend, overspend, and that difference would then be applied to your fund balance. So it's kind of like your savings account after the end of the year. After you receive all of your paychecks, then you balance your household budget. It's really what would be left over that you would either have to, borrow to pay as a deficit, or what would be left over to put into a savings account. Typically, organizations try to maintain a healthy fund balance that would allow for to continue operations if there was ever some sort of interruption. Being that we have state-backed revenues, that typically is not as critical, but still important to keep in mind for any organization.
Any follow-up?
No, thank you for that explanation.
Yes, Director Zomber.
Thank you, Chair Gokul-Gandhi. I do want, and maybe this is, when we end up approving, maybe this actually will have to be a motion, but I do think it's really important that we also add the budget priorities from the operational audit that was just released into this. There are some dollar amounts listed in the audit around, strategic planning, a search for certain staff. And I think it's just really important that as we move forward, I don't know, I know there's been some money proposed, but I think we just have to make sure that's also included in the budget. So, when we move forward, I probably would make a motion just to add those to this plan.
Administration.
Chair Gokul-Gandhi, Director Zambor, obviously, when those issues are brought up, we would certainly take the direction of the board.
Any other comments? Okay, I just have one question. Oh, yes, President Herndon, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is regarding number 9, and I want to know if you are taking in consideration the long-range facilities plan when we talk about additional funding going into the kitchens.
Administration.
Chair Gokul-Gandhi, Director Herndon, members of the committee, yes, is the short answer. We will consider, obviously, whatever comes out of those committees, which are currently meeting,
Right.
For anybody in the general public who wants to know that. And again, we also will balance all of our priorities, again, going back to what we need to do to make sure children get what they need. And I say that only because there's a limited amount of money. So we have to also explore what we can do, what we've already done, and plan moving forward. So, yes.
Thank you.
Any follow-up?
No.
Anybody else? Okay, I'd like to pass the gavel really quickly to Director Zomber.
Director Gokul-Gandhi.
So I just wanted to ask about adaptive budgets. So during the first Trump presidency, there was a threat to cut the Department of Education by $9 billion. We are seeing real movement to destroy Title I funding and other sources of federal funding that the state receives to supplement our public schools. And so, not to fearmonger, but I do think it's more of a real threat this time around than last time. And so my question to you is, are you doing any worst case scenario planning or adaptive budgets should our federal funding happened to evaporate overnight.
Chair Gokul Gandhi, or Chair Zomber,
Right,
Director Gokul
administration.
Gandhi, members of the committee. We've had conversations. The realities are that there is so much unknown, and even in other districts and other parts of this is conversations that we're having as well, not just in isolation. To be completely honest, we would, and we have started initial conversations about that, but the loss of that money would really, again, not to fearmonger, but that would be a tremendous blow to our district and many districts, right? And something that I don't think I want to speak in real specifics about, because I don't know, but needless to say, it would be something that would alter what our students receive in a incredible way, and not in a good way. We're talking about so many of the programs that Title I is set up to support the most neediest students across not only our district, but across the state. It's not a great conversation to have, but we have been discussing what we would need to do.
Follow-up?
Yeah, I think this is just an appeal to the listening audience that as we start to learn more about what these impacts look like and how much more real the threat gets, we are going to need to mobilize very, very quickly. And we are going to need to have a real organized opposition to continue to keep our schools open, because what I think Mr. Galvan wasn't saying, to err on the side of hope, is that that could fundamentally close our doors to the many students we serve. And so I just want everyone to be prepared that a fight is probably coming, and that we need to band together to make sure that our doors can be open to serve all of our children and our educators and the various communities that we serve beyond that. So I will take the gavel back. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, what is the pleasure? Oh, yes, Director Simpson.
I mean, you said it, but I just think it's really important for people to know the reality is that the voices of the people is what has put a pause on some things. And so call to action is school board and parents and community members. Because I think, as we've seen, that's about the only thing that has had at least some weight to it that people consider. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Director Simpson. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, yes, Director Zomber. Go ahead. You can make the motion if that's what you're going to do.
Thank you, Chair Gokul Gandhi. Yes, I'd like to move that we approve the administration's recommendation to approve the proposed FY 25-26 budget priorities as listed in the item and in the MGT operational audit recommendations.
Is there any further discussion? Can I get a second? President Herndon?
Aye.
Second, you mean?
I move that,
No, we just need a second. Just a second.
I second.
Thank you. Dr. Owen Moore.
On Director Zomber's motion to approve the proposed fiscal year 2025-26 budget priorities and the MGT priorities, Director Ferguson? Aye. Director Garcia?
Aye.
Director Herndon?
Aye.
Director Jackson?
Aye.
Director Leonard?
Aye.
Director Simpson?
Aye.
Director Zomber?
Aye.
And Chair Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
That's 8 ayes, the motion passes.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, next item, please.
The item 3 is report with possible action on fiscal year 2025-2026 estimated enrollment, revenues, and long-range financial forecast. This is an informational item, and although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Thank you. Would the Office of Accountability and Efficiency please present the item?
Thank you, Chair Gokul Gandhi. Matt Chasen, Office of Accountability and Efficiency. So annually, the OAE, in collaboration with the Administration's Office of Finance, produces a financial 5-year forecast. Now, the intent of this forecast is to bring visibility to both short and long-term financial constraints or opportunities on the financial horizon of the district. Further, it allows the board to gain an awareness of the impacts and the effects of one-time investments versus recurring or ongoing. So to use the example, a one-time investment could be a textbook adoption, and recurring and ongoing would be salary and wages, increases in those areas. Now, as a forecast, if Mr. Sinram could maybe advance me just to the assumption slide, I'm going to do this slightly out of order. We're attempting to look into the future, and the future has some uncertainty. When we look at how our funding works, and it's attached to state biennial budgets. So we, at a minimum, have 3 state biennial budgets that we're attempting to project and account for. So that introduces some uncertainty. When we build the forecast, what we're trying to do is replace that uncertainty with some reasonable and conservative estimates about what we expect on the horizon. So I'm going to walk through the assumptions here related to those. On the revenue side, this forecast was built considering the adoption of the referendum. So you see that present here. You also see the annual increase of $325 per pupil. That is what is built into the forecast that you see here as well. Again, considering the revenue, this also considers a decline annually in the enrollment of roughly 500 students. On the expenditure side, we are projecting salaries increasing as a function of steps and lanes and CPI, with CPI generally returning to about 2.5% in the short term and 2% over the longer term. It also reflects some medical cost inflation, and what we have put into the forecast is 3% on medical, 8% on prescription, and 4% for the Medicare Advantage costs, those increasing at those rates annually over the term that you see in the forecast. Last, we apply in supplies, materials, and purchase services an inflation rate of 3.5%. I think all of these are reasonable. I think they're prudent conservatively for the purposes of projecting the financial position of the district over the next 5 years. Okay, so with that, yes, if we can then return to the, I guess I apologize for how small that is. If you could browse on your computers, I'll be happy to walk you through what those numbers look like. On the revenue side, which is the top line here, I've mentioned that this already considers the referendum lifts and the increase of the $325 per pupil annually. Over 5 years, that produces a lift in revenue of projected of just under $155 million. Looking on the expenditure side then, using all the assumptions that I mentioned earlier, that's a projected increase over the next 5 years of roughly $212 million. Now, the unfortunate reality of that is that that's a $57 million difference of more expenditures projected to increase than our revenue. Now, if I wade through just a little bit more detail below, you can see what the impact is on what our projected salaries and wages is for CPI and implementation of the steps and lanes. That totals about $122 million. When we look at what is actuarially projected per the inflation rate that we talked about and the actual employee usage, you can see that that's projected to increase just under $72 million. I will mention that historically, recently, we have seen the actual experience in this space a little bit less than what the actuarial predicted amount has been. But I do think for the purposes of the forecast, it is prudent to work with the actuarial assumptions, especially over a 5-year range. Going forward then, the net impact annually of the difference between the increase in revenue and the increase in the expenditures, you can see what a projected deficit or surplus is annually. Now, for each of the years, given what we have in the assumptions here, you can see somewhere between 20 million and 50 million all the way in the furthest out year, 5 years out, of what that deficit looks like. Structurally, over the 5-year, that is a cumulative deficit of about 145 million. I will say that given the lift of the referendum and the annual increase of the 325 per pupil, this is probably the least bleak 5-year forecast that we have collaborated to produce on behalf of the district. There are still structural challenges that produce deficits annually, but the generosity of the citizens of Milwaukee in the referendum and what is currently the 325 lift helps us tremendously. Further, the reduction of the COLA projected out, because we had a high point of 8%, that being cut nearly by a quarter to 2% is what's producing, again, what I will categorize as the least bleak outlook that we have had. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Sinram then to give you a look at the enrollment projection.
Administration.
Thank you. Nick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. The only additional information that I'd like to provide about this slide is that, this projection is for our operations fund. So in the event that grant costs rise faster than what grantors allocate to the district, that would also need to be addressed. So just a little additional context. If we skip over the assumptions slide that was already covered, we find ourselves at the last slide. This shows, this is a familiar slide that we present annually, showing the district's projected enrollment. You can see past trends. We are all very optimistic that enrollment has stabilized since pandemic-related drops. Unfortunately, though, the reality is that school districts nationwide are anticipating fewer students, and that's largely a result of national demographic trends. Individuals are just having fewer children, they're having them later in life, and that is impacting our revenues as well. So that concludes our presentation, and we would be happy to take any questions or comment.
Okay, first I'm going to go to public commentary. We have one member who would like to speak. Quinton Claib, I'm sorry, I should have announced your name, but I apologize. I invite you to the podium.
Thank you so much. Hi, Quinton Claibon, Klabon. Yeah, I have a couple of requests. First, I ask that you start making more realistic predictions about enrollment loss. In the last 20 years, Milwaukee Public Schools lost more than 500 students every year but 3, and 2 of those were explained by a large private school closing and a large charter school closing. Given various baby bus predictions, as mentioned, 1,000 a year seems a lot safer, to Director Chasen's theme. The difference is millions in dollars you might have to save, so it is significant. And if you lose fewer than 1,000 students, terrific. You have some financial wiggle room to adjust unexpected costs. Second, I hope that you could explain in a little bit more depth the immediate operating deficit. The referendum recommendation last year said that we would be in the black by 2027, whereas the last budget passed said basically what it said up there. Should voters expect another referendum by 2030? Should parents expect enrichment cuts that were just restored? By 2028, Milwaukee will be one of the highest spending big districts in the country, so hopefully our students receive an education that feels like it. And then third, something to consider, recent federal requirements have mandated districts produce a cost per school amount. If you go to like DPI's database in WiseDash, Milwaukee's is not filled in, maybe just because of the financial documents that we're not in yet. But it may be worth considering when you fill those in to have a cost per school meted out. Obviously, some schools will cost more to educate students than others, but perhaps some underused buildings are incredibly expensive to maintain, and it might be worth considering that as you look at budget documents. That said, it is awesome to see the projected operation fund revenues and expenditures land close to what you budgeted in May and October. It is a great sign of getting things right going forward. So thank you, Officer Sawa and Superintendent Galvan and the board. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll now open it up to committee members to make comments or ask questions. Go ahead, Director Leonard.
So a couple of comments, just some observations, actually. First of all, is there any, and I've sort of already asked this of Matt Chasen, and he's right about the snow globe example, but do we have any kind of information on a projected plateau when we know that because we're never going to get to zero. There's never going to be a complete, what would be our plateau when it comes to student enrollment numbers? Is there any idea of where that exists?
Administration?
Nick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. I think that is something that the administration would have to research more in depth and maybe even consider utilizing national trends or academic research.
And with that thought in mind, in my mind, I think we should be planning more for the long term if we can, with that thought in mind. I don't think we should be banking on a significant enrollment increases or anything to do with enrollment, eventually we have to come to a number and a place where we can sort of corral our budgets to be very, very realistic. So we don't have these, and maybe I'm asking for a lot, maybe this is unrealistic, but the way I look at it is that we go through this every year. I've been watching us do this for over 32 years, and it's like we never really get to the place where it could be a much smaller deficit, a much clearer picture of what we could really do. So it's just a suggestion. I'm not looking for any answers on that. And then the last thing is, I really may should have asked this on a previous item, but for the listening public, could you give an explanation? This is more for our school budgets and the cuts that are coming their way, because I'm getting a lot of calls. Could you explain where those cuts are and how that's coming about? You did a good job explaining it to me, but I think the public could take advantage of that by hearing you speak to them about it.
Administration?
Yeah, absolutely. Nick Syndrome, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. So the administration's goal this year was to utilize the additional referendum revenue limit and associated revenues to maintain services wherever possible. I believe largely we will be able to accomplish that. The one area in which schools, through the school budgeting process, are allocated funds on a per pupil basis. And we have a number of different, what we call projects in our financial system. There's different sources of revenue for school-based budgeting that tie to those specific projects. And so the three kind of general pots of money that we consider are school budgets, office budgets, and then what we call centrally funded school supports. And so schools were asked to utilize the same per pupil, $5,000 per pupil, for their school-based budgets. So for those limited positions that are included in those projects, that would mean absorbing the cost of our steps and our COLA. And so that is our cost of living adjustment that's designed to ensure that our employees' salaries keep pace with inflation. The other pots, however, though, that schools would benefit from, such as the centrally funded school supports, the goal is to be able to and absorb those increased costs with the additional referendum funding. So it really is solely in that one pot of money that there would be not a reduction in funding, but the need to absorb increased costs.
Any follow-up?
No, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions on this side of the room? Okay, going over here, Director Herndon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to know, how do you incorporate the cost or expenditures for special needs services?
Administration?
Chair Gokul Gandhi, Director Herndon, members of the committee, Eduardo Galvan. Again, special needs services are a requirement under the law. So whatever is determined within the IEP, we then as a district allocate resources to provide those services. Again, what ends up happening not only in Milwaukee Public Schools, but in any district that has special needs students, because the reimbursement isn't at a level that covers that cost, we then, and other districts then, have to take money out of other funds or pots of money, as Mr. Sinran has described, and allocate those towards those students' needs. And that's what we need to do, and that's what we have to do. It's morally right, and it's an obligation under the law. However, again, that then does pull money from other areas that are then impacted.
Any follow-up?
Yes. So will there be a way that we could showcase that in our budget this year? Typically, it's not anything that has readily jumped out to me and probably anyone else, and the community at large doesn't necessarily understand the significant cost that the district has to expend out for that purpose and not be reimbursed by the state.
Administration?
Nick Sinram, Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services. We could absolutely identify that for you. That is somewhat of a challenge since there are many costs that we incur when we are educating our special needs students. Everyone knows that even if a teacher is in a regular ed classroom or a paraprofessional is doing regular ed duties, the school community bands together to support all of our students. So it probably will not capture the true costs that we devote towards our special needs students, but we can certainly provide the projects that are clearly identified to you as special education, either through federal grants or through our local resources.
Any follow-ups?
Thank you. That's it.
Any other questions over here? Any questions over here? Any other comments from OAE? Okay. Madam Secretary.
Madam Chair, that was the last item on this meeting's agenda.
Thank you. With that, we will adjourn this meeting, and we will start our Committee on Student Achievement and School Innovation in just a few minutes. Thank you.